So today what we're going to talk about are 5 emotions that you might be feeling after a breakup that don't mean that you need to get back together with your ex. Sometimes our feelings kind of fool us and we think that certain things are real because of how we feel about them. We're going to talk about that today. I'm Carissa Montooth, love coach and energy healer. And so let's say you did the right thing, right? You ended the relationship, you knew it wasn't healthy, and so you ended it, but you still miss that person. You still cry and you still wonder if, if maybe you made the right decision. You still kind of doubt that a little bit. Having those feelings, it doesn't mean that you need to go back. It just means that you're human, and we're going to talk about specifically what those feelings are. But first, I want to tell you, I'm really proud of you. Because breaking up when you've been in an unhealthy relationship, everybody tells you, you just need to break up with them. You just need to break up with them. But it's a hard thing to do. It's really a hard thing to do for a lot of us. So you did it. You did the hard thing. I'm proud of you. And I hope that you're proud of yourself. So now let's get into what you might be feeling in that situation. All right. So the first thing you're probably feeling is grief. And grief is that feeling of like, I miss you. I miss our routines that we had together. I miss having someone to text. Sometimes it's you miss the action, right? It's you miss having someone to talk to before you fell asleep, having someone to wake up with in the morning. And that's because we become kind of addicted to a person. We don't even want to say kind of. There are neurological changes that happen when we develop an emotional attachment to someone. So we are kind of addicted to them. They're in our system. And so it's not just a thought that we're having. It's actually an entire, physical and biochemical experience that we're having when we miss this person. And sometimes that feeling of like, I miss you is just what some psychologists call innocent grief. Innocent grief is like what happens when a child is very attached to its mother and the mother leaves the room. And the mother's not doing anything wrong by leaving the room, but the child still feels an intense sadness and grief because the mother is not in the room. So sometimes that's what's happening, and it's just that, we're experiencing a loss and we have a really deep sense of attachment. That's just what humans do. So grief just means that you loved that person really sincerely. That's all. It doesn't mean that it's a mistake to not be with them anymore. It just means that your heart is adjusting to that loss of the person that you were really, really attached to. And it also doesn't mean that you made the wrong decision. It just means the person mattered to you. Literally, that's what it means. This person mattered to me. This person was important to me. And it's okay to let that grief run its course. I know that sometimes we feel like our hearts are going to break. And I understand that feeling. And I promise you, if you just hold out a little bit longer, each day it gets a little bit better. And when you are grieving, give yourself time. Give yourself time to grieve. You don't have to grieve on anyone else's timetable. Sometimes people feel like because you're grieving the loss of a relationship and that nobody died, that you should be able to just get over it really quickly, right? We can take time off from work when a family member dies, but we cannot take time off from work usually for a breakup, even though the sense of loss can be the same. So let that grief run its course and let it take as long as it needs, and do not push yourself to go any faster. You can get rest, you can drink water. Those are the only things that really help. Rest and water and time, because those are the things that help your body to heal. So what else can we be feeling? What other emotions can we be feeling? We can be feeling anger, and we can feel anger really intensely. And I'm talking about anger after grief for a specific reason. So when you feel angry after a breakup, you can be having thoughts like, I wasted so many years of my life, or I gave up so much for this person. I can't believe I accepted that kind of treatment. And I get angry every time I think about it. Those can be things that are just constantly coming into your mind. And the thing about anger is your protection system. Anger tells you that your boundaries have been violated. A lot of times in an unhealthy relationship, or let's say a relationship that started out healthy maybe, but then becomes unhealthy for whatever reason, we suppress our anger, especially women do, because we're really trying to preserve the relationship. Or maybe we just learned that we were never allowed to be angry. Maybe we learned that from a really young age. So then when the relationship ends, this anger comes back online, right? And a lot of times what we're talking about is righteous anger. It's that our boundaries were actually violated. We were treated as though we did not have value, in some way. And a lot of times angry women who are angry and who are experiencing righteous anger are labeled as crazy or bitter or too emotional. It's kind of this cliche, right? It's like, I was talking to someone who was telling me that a relative of his, every time he would break up with a woman, would say, oh, she was crazy. And that's a pretty common thing. There was a quote from Tina Fey where she said something along the lines of like, she thinks that the definition of crazy is a woman who keeps talking even though no one wants to have sex with her anymore. Right? So I'm paraphrasing, but yeah. So because we live in a society where like there's a stigma around a woman being angry, right? Sometimes what we'll do when we have righteous anger, when we're angry for a good reason, is we will bury that anger and we will show our sadness instead, because no one's afraid of a sad woman. No one is afraid of a woman who's grieving, and sometimes she will receive comfort, right? But a woman who is angry is actually very powerful, and she can destroy certain structures that are in place that are oppressive for her. So people who benefit from those kinds of structures being in place also have an interest in labeling women crazy when they're angry, right? And putting a stigma on that. So anger is really just telling you that your boundaries mattered, they were violated, and don't let it happen again. So we don't want to suppress our anger, especially because it can turn inward and it can end up causing health issues for us. So we want to find ways that we can actually get it out of our body. Sometimes people do that through kickboxing. Sometimes people do that through scream therapy. Sometimes people just do that through shaking out your body really, really hard. Sometimes people do that through like, not extreme sports, but like intense physical activity, can be a way of working it out. Or self-defense classes or things like that, but we want to work it out. We want to work the anger, let the anger be expressed so that we're not storing it in our bodies and focusing it inward. So another emotion that we sometimes are feeling after a breakup, and you can be feeling all of these things, you can be feeling one of these things, you can feel 2 or 3 of these things, but we usually feel some combination of these things, is shame. And shame is that feeling of like, well, I should have known better. Shame is that feeling of like, oh no, my friends probably saw this before I did, or, I'm so embarrassed, I can't believe that I stayed. Those kinds of feelings, right? Those are all around shame. And the thing about shame is that you're judging your past self based on your present clarity. And there's just no way you can win in that scenario. We're all doing the best that we can with the information that we have at the time. We're doing the best that we can with how healed we are at the time. We're doing the best we can with what we believe is possible for ourselves at the time and what we believe our possible choices are at the time. So just understand that a lot of really intelligent, very capable, very loving, very wise women have still done things in relationships that made them feel shame later. Whether it was something that they feel that, morally they wish they hadn't done, or some way where they feel that they abandoned themselves in some way, So understand that doesn't define them. It doesn't define you. Everybody does things that they wish that they hadn't done later on. Usually the people who are speaking up the loudest and pointing the finger to shame other people are people who have a lot of shame in their own past. And so shame is the language that they speak, right? They speak shame really fluently. And it's easier to point a finger outside of themselves than to identify with and be accountable for the times that they themselves have done things that they might, their present self might consider shameful. So understand that those behaviors, everyone does the best they can with what they know at the time. And one thing that Brené Brown teaches is that shame thrives in silence and secrecy. So something that can really help you is to find someone who is safe to confide in and who has earned your trust, and be vulnerable with that person. Share with them the things that you feel that you wish you had done differently in the past. And usually what will happen is you will find that you are not alone in that feeling or that experience of having done things that you wish that you hadn't done. You know, our younger selves were not operating from the same position of being healed that we are now. You know, we might not have even realized the ways that we were acting out when we were younger. That's okay. Give your past self some grace. You know, psychoneuroimmunologist Mario Martinez talks about healing fields for specific archetypal wounds. And the healing field for the shame wound is honor. So think about how you might be able to honor yourself now as a way of healing that wound. How can you honor your boundaries now? You know, how can you honor your wisdom? How can you honor your growth? How can you honor your healing? How can you honor the courage that it took for you to leave that relationship that was unhealthy? You know, give yourself that now. So another horrible feeling that we have, another horrible emotion that we have after we have broken up, even when the breakup was good, even when it was the best thing for us to do because it took courage and we left an unhealthy situation, right? Is that we can feel fear. And fear is that intense feeling that's like, maybe my standards were just too high. Maybe I'm going to be alone forever. What if I end up alone? It's like that feeling, right? And really fear is scarcity trying to tell you that it's being realistic, right? And reasonable. It's trying to speak in that, like, I'm a reasonable, realistic voice, but it's just scarcity talking to you. It's your mind being really mean to you, you know, and trying to tell you that you're less valuable than you are, and trying to tell you that there is less abundance out there for you than there actually is. You know, so a lot of times, you know, we're believing this lie, and that's creating this really intense feeling of fear. And another thing that fear does and that scarcity does is it makes those past relationships that we knew were unhealthy when we were in them, it makes that relationship seem more valuable in hindsight than it actually was. So we start having these thoughts of like, maybe I should go back there. Maybe we should reconcile, blah, blah, blah. It's not true. It's not true. You know, it took you a tremendous amount of courage and bravery. You are already stronger than the fear. So keep going. Keep moving forward. You can do that. And you won't always be afraid. So another thing that we feel often when we have had a breakup is we feel confusion. You know, and the confusion sounds like, well, I just need to talk to him one more time. I just need like one more chance to explain myself. I just need one more chance to, you know, help him understand how I feel or what I was experiencing then or what I was going through then, or, you know, to tell him my point of view. Or it's like a confusion around him and his motivations. Like, why would he do this? Like, if he knew that he hurt me, why wouldn't he apologize? You know, all these kinds of things. Maybe if we talked one last time, maybe if we talk one more time, you know, those kinds of thoughts. And the thing about it is, what you're doing is you're trying to understand someone else's behavior using your own values. You know, you're trying to see them through the lens of your values. And you're assuming that because you were operating in good faith, they were operating in good faith. You know, you're assuming that because you would apologize if you hurt another person, they would apologize if they hurt another person. And I know it seems simple, right? But we do that really often, where we expect other people to treat us the way that we treat them, because that seems to make sense to us, because we have empathy and self-awareness and we're not psychopaths. But the thing is, plenty of people have very low self-awareness, and not everyone even has the capacity or the accountability to understand what they've done and how they have wronged someone, or even to understand their own thought processes and their own kind of internal cognitive dissonance, and like all the areas where they contradict themselves and they might be a little bit hypocritical or different things like that. Not everybody has the self-awareness to understand those things, or really cares, because maybe they've never had to look at those things, because maybe they've still been loved and they've still been like taken care of emotionally and all those kinds of things. So they haven't really had to do that kind of work yet, and what we're doing really often is we're looking at someone who has zero self-awareness or very low self-awareness, and we're trying to ask them to explain to us what they did and why they did it. And they don't understand what they did or why they did it, so they can't explain it to us, right? And also, usually immediately after a breakup, people are really busy protecting their own ego, and they're creating a narrative that is telling them that like they're better off without you. And, they're telling themselves that because they really want to believe that that's true. They want that to be true. So when we try to go to someone immediately after a breakup and try to ask for some kind of clarity that's going to help us, we're not going to get that. They're in this narrative that says, I am better off without you. And even if they are in pain or they're hurting, they're trying so hard to convince themselves that they're better off without you, that you coming to them for clarity and wanting to have an honest conversation and wanting to have accountability and wanting to be treated with empathy and all those things, that's not going to happen there. It's just not going to happen there at all. The thing about clarity, and I've learned this working with hundreds of women to help them heal and to move on into new relationships. The thing about clarity is that like 9 times out of 10, you end up getting a closure. You end up finding out either from the person themselves, they come to you and they're like, I was messed up, blah, blah, blah. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm so sorry that happened. I never should have treated you that way, blah, blah, blah. Right? Either that happens, or you find out in some way that their life actually started to decline after you left it, in ways that were like really obvious, So you often get that closure that says, yes, I was valuable. I was a good thing in that person's life. But you usually don't get it until you're already happy in a new relationship and you don't care anymore. So, sometimes that confusion, that intense feeling of confusion is us looking for clarity in the wrong place and at the wrong time. Because if we wait long enough, clarity and closure usually come on their own. So, patience and distance help us to see that picture. And that's a really cool thing. So after the breakup, your emotions can be really loud, but let your wisdom guide your decisions, not your emotions in the immediate aftermath of that. So now I am curious, and I would love to know from you, which of these feelings, the grief, the anger, the shame, the fear, the confusion, which of those feelings felt the most intense to you after, your most recent breakup? Let me know in the comments and I'll meet you down there and we can talk about it a little bit. And if conversations like this help you feel a little less alone and let you know that you are seen, then, like and share and subscribe and do all that fun stuff. And we'll have more of those conversations. We'll have more opportunities to connect that way. And remember that you don't make love happen. You make love welcome. And you do that by healing from the past. So take care. And I'll see you soon.